APEC day. Wait, I'm being told to wait. You can go ahead and get started. We're going to be talking to a few defense ministers in just a few minutes, but before that, we want to give a little bit of a scene setter, about 20 minutes. So we're here today to talk about NATO 2030. It's an ambitious agenda that prepares NATO to deal with the most important security challenges of the next 10 years. So I'd like to kick off today's session by coming to the audience. So if you could go ahead and take a look at your Slido app, there's a question that has been laid out for you. And that question is, what do you think, what will be the primary challenge facing NATO in the next 10 years? So go ahead and answer that question in about 1 or 2 words. And while you do that, I'm going to introduce our fantastic panel that we have with us today. First, we have Ambassador Baiba Braja, who's NATO's Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy. It's nice to see you, Ambassador. We also have Ambassador Christoph Heusgen, who is a permanent representative of Germany to the United Nations. And with us from Washington, just a few blocks from where I live, is Ms. Katrina Mulligan, who's the Acting Vice President for National Security and International Policy at the Center for American Progress. Katrina, it is great to see you. It's great to see all of you, and thank you for being with us today. If we could go ahead and go back to the Slido questions so I can go ahead and see what the audience, well, that's very clear. We got Russia, China, cyber defense, and of course, this comes on the heels of the NATO summit earlier this year, or earlier this week. So I'd like to go ahead and turn it to Ambassador Braja, who is coming to us from NATO headquarters. It's been a big week in Brussels, been a big week in Europe with the US-EU summit, but also the NATO summit on June 14th. So what is your view from Brussels, Ambassador Braja, and how did the vision of NATO 2030 specifically factor into the summit outcomes from earlier this week?
Thank you very much, Globsec, for inviting me, and it's great to be back, even though this time virtually in Bratislava, and next time in person, promise. The NATO summit was indeed a decision-making summit. It was not just a summit of managing differences or getting us together. So the 30 leaders made an important package of decisions on NATO 2030 initiative, which is to adopt alliance for the future. And when we think back, the NATO is indeed the adaptation in person. When we remember 48, 49, when the alliance was established, the external enemy was actually Germany. That was considered at the time. So look at where we are now, and we are preparing for the future. Indeed, the most important sort of guiding principle, framing principle, is that the allies recognize that we are in the era of systemic competition, and that requires a number of practical steps. So first, to strengthen international rules-based order. So work with partners, like-minded countries, organizations, to make sure that what we agree at internationally is actually observed. So, and NATO has its role to play. It's a regional political military alliance, but of course we have global partners. And we have values that we've been founded upon. So it's protection of our democracies, 1 billion citizens in the modern era. So for that, we need to strengthen, of course, defense and deterrence, to have the adaptation also there, which means also not only the hard power and the hard capabilities that our militaries need, but also the resilience of all societies, including private sector, including civil societies, including every citizen. But also, of course, adoption of the emerging and disruptive technologies to ensure that our strong military and strong political unity have the necessary technological edge to be able to work among themselves, to be interoperable, but also to be able to resist to all external threats, whatever and wherever they come from. And again, for political unity, meaning the agility of understanding what is happening externally, what we need to do internally, the consultations among the allies, and consultations with the closest partners on all issues of relevance. And finally, again, for the partners, the enhanced package for training, and not only training, as one way, but the exchange, the understanding, and the real capability building for them to address those challenges and threats that they require.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Before we turn it over to Katrina Mulligan, I'd like to take a look at the word cloud one more time before we move on. So this is really interesting. I don't know that just a few years ago you would have seen China as a top answer here when we're asking what the primary challenge facing NATO will be in the next 10 years. But it tees us up really nicely for our next question. And Katrina, I'm going to go ahead and turn it to you. So there are three words that we hear a lot of the time when we are talking about today's strategic landscape. And those three words are great power competition. And that means NATO doesn't have just one strategic competitor around which all of the allies can coalesce. It means we now have two near-peer competitors, both of which for whom NATO must have a strategy. So Katrina, turning it over to you, and Ambassador Huysken, I'd ask you to jump in on this as well, if you'd like. Can NATO handle both Russia and China? And does it have the ability to do both at the same time, and should it?
Well,
Katrina, over to you.
I certainly hope so. I certainly expect them to. China and Russia pose very different challenges for NATO and allied countries. The Chinese Communist Party is actively attempting to shape the rules and norms of the international system, and they're taking an increased leadership role, or they're trying to, within the international order. The Russian government is more belligerent. They are breaking rather than shaping global norms. And so you really need to think about them both as authoritarian countries that need to be tackled together, but also look at the individual goals and norms that they're trying to shape and break, and tailor policy responses accordingly. On China, I really think that NATO should recognize China as a clear threat to the alliance. Based on the word cloud, it seems like we're already there or near there. But that threat is both in the short term, but much more so in the longer term. That we need to build resilience, shore up critical weaknesses among the allies, particularly in technology and other areas that the Chinese Communist Party can exploit. On Russia, it's a bit of a different approach. The costs need to be clear and imposed for its belligerent behavior and gross violations of international law. But one of the unique attributes that we need to take into account as we're formulating policy in this area is that the China-Russia relationship has really grown in recent years, including in diplomacy, in defense, in economics. And Russia's strategic reevaluation of its relationship with China resulted in part from the fallout with the West as a result of its annexation of Crimea in 2014. And so what we're starting to see is enhanced military cooperation and shared political values that have really driven the countries closer. Beijing and Moscow largely agree on the role of the sovereignty of the state, of human rights, and the principle of non-interference. And those similarities are aiding in their cooperation. But there are deep economic and structural barriers that stand in the way of further cooperation and integration between these two powers. And Russia is going to remain the junior partner in that relationship, which is a position it doesn't relish. And so there are some real opportunities, I think, for NATO and allied countries to unite around a strategy that would, at the strategic level, recognize and counter Beijing and Moscow's efforts to fragment the alliance, and show and view them as coordinating their efforts to challenge the global governance system and curb U.S. and Western power. By considering them together, but also as individual challenges, I think the focus really ought to be on China. China is much more interested in Russia in having a stable working relationship with the United States, albeit on China's terms. And the U.S. is going to need to work better to understand the local dynamics within the borders of its allies and partners as they work through the China challenge. And then, with Russia, it's going to be really curbing their aggressive behavior.
Yep. Thank you, Katrina. Ambassador Huysken, would you like to jump in on the China and Russia challenge when it comes to NATO?
Yes, happy to do so, and I fully agree with what Katrina just said. Now, I don't know if it was a mistake or not, you didn't invite the German NATO ambassador, but you invited the German UN ambassador. So I'm not the NATO specialist, but I see how this relationship with China and Russia plays out here in New York. And I can only subscribe to what Katrina said before. We see a very close cooperation between Russia and China. And within the Security Council, where I was a member of the last couple of years, you couldn't, when it came to voting, they never parted from each other. But they have a different approach. Russia is much more aggressive, much more belligerent, as Katrina said. They don't actually care about being in a minority and getting, voted against in large margins. China is much more subtle. China is actually trying to reshape the basis of the multilateral order, and this is what I see as something very dangerous. And this is, when you look at the basis of the UN, this is a rules-based order. This is an order where individual human rights play an important role. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a basis of the international community, and China has a new narrative, or not that new, but China has a narrative that the most important is the state, is the society, and national sovereignty, and what countries do within their borders is up to them. There's nothing from the outside that you intervene. So that you intervene. So we have it, of course, the case, the most prominent is about the Uyghurs, where we say, this is something we have to engage, and we have to protect the individuals. 1 million people in detention camps. China says, no, this is none of your business. We have brought 300 million Chinese into wealth and well-being, and the 1 million have to pay a price for this. And this is unacceptable. We have to fight for it. We have to see that the values that we stand for, that we stood for, that was the basis for NATO, for the UN, that this continues to work. And to come back also do it, of course, Russia much more aggressive. They invade Ukraine. They undercut the Chemical Weapons Convention in Syria. They bomb hospitals. China is much more subtle, but as dangerous as I said, undercutting the values. And this is where we have to stand together. NATO has to stand together, but with the EU, we have to have a global community where we defend our values, and this is something that has to be done at the UN, but of course something where NATO has to be strong. And one more point for NATO, of course, the classical defense. We have to be ready, for situations where you have the aggressor trying to invade. But the much more important, I think, is at this stage the hybrid warfare. What we saw here in the US right now with this big pipeline, or what we have seen starting in the early or the mid 2000s with the cyber, you remember the Bronze Soldier, etc. And what we see now on a very broad range, attacks against parliaments, also the disinformation campaign and all this. This is much broader, and this is what NATO has to cope with.
Thank you. And I failed to mention at the beginning that if you have questions, you can type them onto the Slido app. And I also mentioned that we only had about 20 minutes, so I can't promise that we'll get to them. But if you have any, please send them over, and I'll try. I'd like to pick up on something that you said, Ambassador Huisken.
To one element in the previous comments. So,
yep, please.
Indeed, NATO is as I said, regional organization. It doesn't mean that NATO will conduct operations, in the Pacific, even though China is very clearly reflected there is a new strong language in the communique. However, again, today's threats are completely different. They affect NATO's nations, NATO citizens, our citizens, and of course, it's our interest to be united. This transatlantic celebration of unity that we had on the 14th of June with President Biden and with allies completely united around these understanding of these new threats. In the same time, of course, also with China. China is rapidly expanding its nuclear arsenal. Its values is not in accordance with Washington Treaty. its coercive behavior, as Ambassador Huysgen said, with its towards its own population, but also not only towards its own, also to other countries. It all together as a package is something that was not there even in 2019, and you would have seen in London communiques that language was quite different. Having said that, of course, as with all countries, also with Russia, China, NATO is ready to talk. The dialogue is an important part of who we are. And in that respect, also with China, China has to be part of the solution on the climate change combating if we are serious about it. And also on quite a number of other issues. So again, we do recognize it's a challenge, the situation has changed, it's systemic competition, but in the same time, the dialogue has to be there and we are open for it.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on something that Ambassador Huysgen mentioned, and you have mentioned as well. Resilience. It's an important topic at NATO, especially as the alliance deals increasingly with these sub-Article 5 level threats. We've seen, in September this year, the United States will mark one of the greatest black swan events in our history, September 11th. We're just also coming out of the throes of a global pandemic. So how is NATO thinking about black swan events? And do you think there's anything that NATO has overlooked when thinking about them? Ambassador Braja, I'll come to you, and Katrina and Ambassador Huysgen, if you'd like to jump in as well on that.
Thanks very much for this important question. That's what NATO is basically about. That's why we are investing in adaptation and forecasting the future and scenarios. Our exercises, our whole planning is very much around it. And I'm pleased to say that actually the investment has paid back. Again, there are issues I can't talk about very openly here in an open format, but certainly awareness, agility, and ability to respond for NATO is there. On cyber, obviously, it's more with the nations themselves, even though NATO has clearly said that cyber is operational domain. It's played out in all exercises, clearly understanding that there's not going to be just a military type of operation only. It will always come together with all the hybrids. And in that respect, also with cyber, the nations have shown that they can respond with very concrete measures. So the discussion currently is actually on response measures and how to proceed that. And again, that's for the very much around the 30 allies where we are now.
Thank you. Ambassador Huysgen, to you, and Katrina, we have about 2 or 3 minutes left.
Well, that I'm not the list, but what is very important is that, yes, we have to look at all the challenges that we face with the hybrid warfare, with disinformation campaigns, etc. We have to do that on a national level. Nations are asked to fight it, but I think NATO can do a lot by coordinating, by supporting, analyzing together. These are attacks where we are all confronted with, and NATO is best placed to really cooperate and see that we are resilient. These are many questions. This is from energy, transportation, food and water resources, and communication systems. So there are a lot of things, and we just also have to raise awareness in our population. This cannot be done by governments alone, civil society, private sector have all to work together.
Thank you. Katrina, we're right out of time, so briefly, thank you.
The only thing I would add is that, as we look over the horizon, we need to be paying attention to the investments that the Chinese are making in European infrastructure, which include things like shipping terminals and utilities and telecom networks. Going forward, looking into the future, one of the things that China is going to have the ability to do is potentially weaponize those investments in order to frustrate, limit, or prevent the U.S. or allied use of that infrastructure, which could cause its own black swan event in the future.
Perfect. That's a great note to end on. This was an excellent scene setter. We are going to come up just right now with a panel of defense ministers, so please don't move. And thank you again to our panelists. Looking forward to the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Rachel and our last panelist, and thanks to GlobeSec for bringing us all together for this conversation and by demonstrating resilience, by being one of the first security fora to open up since the pandemic, or as the pandemic is hopefully waning, with a formidable COVID testing site outside. You can't get in here without passing through that. So before I introduce our esteemed panel, I would like to put that last question that the last panel dealt with to the audience through Slido. I'd like to ask all of you, as you find it in your GlobeSec app, what is the next Black Swan event that you think NATO will have to deal with? So while you think about that, I will introduce, with us we have the Honorable Jaroslav Naďa, the Minister of Defense of the Slovak Republic. The Honorable Radmila Sekarenska, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defense of the Republic of North Macedonia. And joining us from Vancouver at the early hour of about, almost 4:30 in the morning is the Honorable Harjit Singh Sajjan, the Minister of National Defense of Canada. We appreciate you beating the sun coming up at 5:06 in Vancouver to be with us. So let's see, do we have, has anyone voted on the Slido app? I'm waiting, I'm looking. Let's see, we've got some answers here. Turkey blocking NATO decision making. We had that long conversation behind closed doors with Turkey on Monday, which might have been a little bit of that. Climate migration. As one of the panelists has said in the last 3 days of discussion, we could see up to 150 million people on the move due to instability from the climate change. Artificial intelligence, if anyone saw War Games, we also have, again, climate change. So that's a good jumping off point. I'd like to now turn to our panelists, and let me start with our host, Minister Naďa. So what do you think could be the next Black Swan? Your parliament just passed your new national defense and security strategy. Is there anything in there that is looking ahead to what you're seeing in your crystal ball?
Thank you very much. First of all, let me start with expressing my gratitude to my friends from GlobeSec for outstanding conference again this year. And, honestly saying, I used to work for them, and I need to say that I believe that it was the most difficult and tough job that I have ever had to work alongside Robert and Milan. And, until the moment that when I became the defense minister, then I said, okay, this is more difficult. But yesterday, as you can see on my face, I learned the lesson that even playing soccer might be very difficult. So, nevertheless, congrats, guys, for excellent job this year again. Thank you. Yes, honestly, it's difficult to have a crystal ball, but we try to find a reflection of current world together with Ivan Korčok, my very close friend and colleague, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and we try to write two documents, security and defense strategies. We renewed these documents actually after 15 years. And I believe that we were successful enough in order to reflect the current reality. Yes, there are some issues that are closer to us, or we consider to be more difficult challenges that are in front of us, including obviously situation with Russia, including cybersecurity. And then there are issues that we believe to be very important, but still, you have some priorities. But things like climate change, things like situation in Arctic, things like ecology and impacts of armed forces on ecology. This is something that we certainly have to bear in mind, and we need to be focused. We must be focused on. Even though still you do priorities and you do what you can pay for on what you have money, and also what the political situation wants from you. And taking this into account, I can say that yes, security strategies that we have together with the money that we spend on defense, is something that that might be useful and help us. But if you have strategies and you don't have money, I think somebody at NATO summit said that, you know, if you have strategies and you don't have money, then it's a hallucinacy. It's not something that that you can do. And none of us, I believe, none of three of us would like to do hallucinacies. We would like to do a real work. And I believe that even after this summit in Brussels, we have a path we want to follow, and I think we can manage.
So just to read between the lines and kind of put words in your mouth, you're saying that Russia is the most likely origin of the next black swan, and I assume you mean something along the lines of Crimea, not just stopping a plane in the middle of European airspace.
Obviously, it's not only about Crimea, and it's not only about the eastern or southeastern part of Ukraine, but it's also about reality that we live in every day here on our soil, here in Slovakia. You know, having hybrid operations very active. Including cyber area, but including also intelligence services being deployed, including obviously misuse of media, propaganda, fake news. You know, these things we focus on, and honestly saying, and I'm very frank and open here, especially here on Globsec soil, people here in Slovakia know very well that we have decided to send 6 Russian intelligence officers with the cover of diplomats back home from Slovakia over the last 12 months. You know, this is reality we live in, and this government for sure in Slovakia is very focused on showing to everyone that this is not a playground.
Thank you. I'd like to go next to the North Macedonian Deputy Prime Minister. Minister Sekerinska, you represent the youngest member of NATO, and I've heard from some of your neighbors, some who are not yet under the NATO umbrella, that they really envy that you now have Article 5 protection. Do you think other NATO members who might be dragging their feet on adding these new countries in, do they understand how it feels for your people, the fear?
Well, thank you, Globsec, for trying to get us more into what we consider the normal. It's difficult with masks and everything, but it's much better than the last year that we remember. Well, thank you actually very much for the question. We have been striving to become a NATO member for 30 years. This was the first time actually that our parliament expressed the interest to join NATO. And just as we were moving closer, I was amazed, especially in the last few years, how many people within the family take the family and the values and Article 5 for granted. And they have learned to become a bit complacent. And I would always ask them to look towards the alliance through the eyes of an outsider and to try and appreciate more what they have. So after almost 30 years of working very hard to get into the alliance, it was a major victory. It did happen in the midst of the corona crisis, so there was no celebratory mode in the country. But to have Article 5 and to have membership in the strongest military and political alliance in the world, 20 years after having NATO troops within the country, first to help us deal with our own internal problems and some of the regional instabilities, it's a major transformation. And this is why I think even during the discussions at the summit, I think we were among the more optimistic tones, because I do remember the times when we were just waiting for the entry and waiting probably for the entry in the worst possible moment for the alliance, because back in 2018 when we got the invitation, many people started asking me, how come you want to get into the alliance, and you know, we have fears whether the alliance will survive. Things have changed, and I think that the summit showed incredible display of not only unity but awareness of how strategic the importance of the alliance is. And it was a music to our ears.
Following up on that, do you think the Black Swan could be an entry of Russian troops into Ukraine instead of just building up on the border? Would NATO respond? Would you push for NATO to respond?
If there is one lesson, bad lesson that we learned, expect the unexpected. And when I heard you mention again Black Swan, I almost had the idea that some of the things that happened back home exactly 3 years ago. We signed the Prespa agreement with Greece. For many people, it was the Black Swan, not in terms of the negative repercussions, of course, in terms of surprise. It was, we got used to the dispute with Greece. Nobody expected a breakthrough. Nobody expected follow-up. Many people who saw us sign the agreement with Greece, I said, okay, there is goodwill between the two governments, but it will never work. And thirdly, and I think that this was the big surprise, it was an utterly homemade, I would say Balkan-made compromise. France helped with strong support, with strong messages, but genuinely it was the political will of the two governments to make a meaningful U-turn. And this is how we became a NATO member state. And this is why I think that when we talk about Black Swan events, we should also try to challenge us sometimes to do braver things, especially politicians. Doing something brave means doing something risky. But it's what we are elected to do. We are elected to challenge the status quo every time we encounter a problem. And especially when it comes to NATO, Article 5 is not the only element of the alliance. We have talked a lot about values, but it's an elementary part. Although when I look at the screen with the small poll that we did here, you see the big Russia sign, you see relatively big China. But if you combine several other things that have appeared on the screen, you will see resilience, you will see lost confidence, you will see vulnerabilities within our own societies. I think that the real Black Swan, which shouldn't be actually a surprise to us all, are the weaknesses of our internal democratic structures. If we don't fail them, we won't fail when crisis calls upon us.
Thank you. And by the way, that's obviously a huge portfolio, and I realize, Defense Minister Sekerinska, I erred in trying to add to your already burgeoning portfolio by also making you a deputy prime minister. So moving on over to Vancouver. Minister, you have waited patiently. I know that within your portfolio is also Canada's Cryptologic Intelligence Agency, the Communication Security Establishment, or CSE, a la GCHQ and NSA. Is your Black Swan possibly related to that?
No, thank you very much again for the question, and thank GlobeSec for inviting me once again and alongside my esteemed colleagues. It's great to be virtually connected with you from Vancouver. When it comes to a Black Swan event, I think we look at what is the likelihood of something to take place. And for example, there's climate change. There's many other events that we have seen in terms of when we talk about Russia, their illegal annexation of Crimea, what's happening in the Donbass area of Ukraine. Russia's already set a pattern. So I don't really consider that a Black Swan. I see that a pattern, and then our actions will counter that pattern. When I look at Black Swan events, I do look at the cybersphere, and I'm very concerned with this. It's not just about cyber attacks, and we've seen what can happen to democracies when cyber attacks are incorporated within a hybrid warfare context. Now, when you take things to the next level, which is probably my biggest concerns in terms of Black Swan events, is when you incorporate artificial intelligence. The progress of algorithms have increased significantly. Nation states have already understood the importance of the collection of data because, as you know, artificial intelligence or good algorithms cannot work unless you have significant amount of data. So when you combine those two, it gives a significant concern because it allows states that who have underlying reasons to take things to the next level, where they may not be able to get away because it would increase the threshold of response from other nations. The cyber world allows you to do things that may not get as enough attention. So as I think it was from the previous panel talked about, infrastructure that is being created around the world, we need to be very mindful of what type of infrastructure, who is building it, does it have that cyber resiliency? Because the last thing you want is all of a sudden in your nation that something to take place that with an on and off switch is in a different country. We have already seen organized crime use ransomware and hold multi-million or million-dollar companies to account, or even billion-dollar companies to account. So this is something that we need to be very mindful and get ready for, but something that NATO and its all the respective nations are taking it very seriously and bringing our collective experience together to making sure that we build not only look at it from a defense perspective, but look at it as building resiliency in your own nations as well.
Well, I want to move on to the headlines and pick up with what Minister Sajjan was just talking about in the NATO communique. In the stated goals of NATO, do you think there was enough in there to dissuade Russia or other malign cyber actors from conducting continuing activities? Was there enough teeth in there?
One, I would say yes. When it comes to words that we put out as nations, and especially as part of NATO, words do matter at that level, obviously. And what we don't want to do is escalate any type of tension. But having said this, those words have significant meaning because those words are backed up by the 30 nations and the resources and the people within those nations. And I can assure you from a Canadian perspective, we have significant talent to be able to contribute. So as we build our own, not build, but enhance our capabilities into the cyber world, artificial intelligence, and we have significant experience, but let's go to the next level when it comes to quantum computing. We have that investment. But we also have now the collective will, the collective resources, the collective, and when I talk about resource, not just dollars, I'm talking about people. That's what is needed to making sure that we take things to the new level, the institutions. And I think no nation should that wants to create tension should ever take that as that the will is not there. So we want to prevent conflict. We need to get into a place where we're actually de-escalating. But as NATO's role is to making sure that we prevent. So those words do have significant teeth, I can assure you.
So you're talking about following through with the rattling of the saber, having a real concrete threat of response. So to bring it back in the room here, President Biden told Vladimir Putin this week that if there was a continuing cyber campaign, another SolarWinds campaign, for instance, that he would respond with cyber weapons. Should NATO be issuing similar threats?
If you're asking me, we've been saying this for a decade already, that it's very difficult to respond to adversary while you're limited by law. You're limited by a legal system, and you want to obey. You want to obey, and you act in line with law. Yes, Harjit already mentioned that we are capable. We are capable of doing certain things that it wouldn't be possible for you to imagine. But we don't do that because we are limited. Because we are limited by the law. But if somebody is still pushing hard and more on you, then you need to act. And we need to be, we need to face this new situation and and act with adequate way. The recent situation with the pipelines in the United States, this is something, even I think that President Biden already mentioned that. This is the red line. You don't do that. Russia wouldn't be happy if we all focus on pipelines that they have. This is critical infrastructure, and if you allow various actors to state or non-state, but actors from your country to focus and to attack the critical infrastructure, then you need to simply wait for reaction. That's reality. And we are capable. United States is capable, Canada is capable, and many of us, we're capable also not only on cyber defense, but also on cyber attack. Do we want to do that? Well, if necessary, we should really consider all options.
Yet, whenever I hear about cyber defense and especially cyber offense, I hear top security officials say, the norms aren't clear. We haven't decided what would trigger a cyber offensive attack. Minister Sekurenska, what would you think is the threshold after which, is it disinformation? Is it interfering in a NATO country's elections? Or is it critical infrastructure?
Well, if we are open, we'll say that all these three lines have been crossed already. And we have seen the price, and we have seen how disruptive they are. And this is why, in my view, the scenarios for a cyber offensive have to be developed. We all hope that the words will be enough. We all hope that the message will be sent out loud and clear and will be understood properly. But we also have to prepare for different scenarios. And in my mind, this is why the summit was so important. The reliability of our alliance is key in the deterrence. Are we for real when we say that actions have their consequences? Are we, dedicated to Article 5, even in this more general form of attacking critical infrastructure or attacking our basic tenets of life, like election process? You don't need to conquer a country. You just destroy the confidence in their electoral process, and you have done most of the work. This is why, in my view, one of the elements that were mentioned in the summit and around the summit was the importance of technology and maintaining the technological edge of the alliance. It's not just having the technological means. It's also shaping the technological regulation. And I think it was President Biden who actually said it before the summit, that the use and the regulation for new technologies have to be dictated by our values and not by the interest of autocratic regimes. I think this is practically the new international order for 21st century. How do we regulate them, and how do we use our maybe backdated international rules order in this new environment? It's technological development, it's globalization, it's climate change. All these forces are shaping our world at an unprecedented pace. And they are a potential for groups of people that can save the world, but they are a potential for groups within the world that can destroy it. Who will be faster will prevail.
Well, that brings me to a frequent mantra of General Ben Hodges, who's now retired, but he used to say the only way NATO is going to succeed is through speed of recognition of the problem, speed of decision about what to do about it, and then speed of assembly, which we all know is rather difficult to get from point A to point B across several European countries because of things like roads not being able to take the weight of the tanks or different rail gauges, etc. But on that speed of decision, how hard do you think it would be to get 30 countries to decide to cyber hack back against Russia? Would you call for it here?
Well, you know what, I used to work for our delegation to NATO, and have been very open. Sometimes it was frustrating to be a member of the committee and to negotiate still with one or two countries that don't, follow the majority of countries around the table in certain things, just because of national interest. Yeah, it's not easy. The question is whether we should lift up, the consensus policy. In defense planning, we have consensus -1 policy, and it worked quite well. Yeah, but it's still alliance, right? And alliance, one of the biggest advantages that it's consensus based. So it's a difficult issue. But yes, there were some situations in the history of NATO when the agreement even did not come, or it took very long time. But I still believe that in situations like Article 5 situations, when the situation is really difficult and under pressure, then I believe that all countries would eventually come to a joint solution. And I don't think that if the situation is really crucial and difficult, then that we would wait for somebody else trying to push hard for their national interest and blackmail others with their national interests instead of playing the same game with the others. So I don't think this will be a big problem, but yes, some bigger or high quality decision making in NATO is a very good topic for the next conference.
Fantastic. Okay. So we have a little over half an hour left, but before I turn to audience questions, and we've already got some great ones coming in, I'll also call on you in the room. I did want to talk about as our North Macedonian minister has mentioned, technology. I got the honor of being part of GlobeSec's outreach to industry on behalf of NATO, where they put members of industry on Chatham House rules panels together with NATO officials. And I got the most unusual instruction I've ever gotten as a moderator. They said, we want people to be blunt. We want criticism. And because it was Chatham House rules, I can't tell you what the criticism was, but the industry officials were blunt. One of the things that we all know is a problem is speed of implementation, and NATO's acquisition program, which has been described to me as so outdated that often the adversary is already working on the third iteration of the NATO design by the time it rolls off the NATO assembly line. So I'd like to start with our Canadian colleague. NATO also announced on Monday an accelerator for industry and new funding for industry to kind of try to jumpstart this process. You have something similar in Canada. Is it a model NATO could follow? Because it sounds like what they outlined Monday was very fluffy. Not a lot of detail yet.
I think one is also to your previous questions. When it comes to NATO, and we look at NATO consensus and the work that you do, and it seems cumbersome, but these are the values that are very important. That that gives us that deterrence. Is you have 30 nations who are coming together, and when they do come together to make that decision on consensus, it means something. But let's not forget, we also not only as nations, but we work bilaterally. We on security issues. There's so many things that are happening within the NATO context, even though it might be bilateral, that those initiatives enhance NATO as well. So when it comes to innovation, this is something that we took very seriously and actually had that direct conversation with industry when we created our defense policy, because we knew that we in the military could not succeed without industry. So we asked them blunt questions. Where are we failing? What do we need to do? And they were very blunt. And they said, it's easier to work outside of Canada than inside Canada. So we wanted to change that. So we started to look at changing procurement rules. They also said, we don't know what you're working towards. It's something so classified. We need predictability. So what we did was, one was give greater predictability. And so we put out not only our defense policy, but a defense investment plan out for 10 years. And we updated every 3 to 4 years so they get predictability. But through that, from the innovation side, what we wanted to do is we throw out challenges. So a program we called IDEAS, Innovation for Defense Excellence and Security. throw out challenges, not just to industry, to academia, to anybody working even in a garage if they have an idea, is here's a challenge that we have. And they will propose ideas. They will compete. Those ideas will be competed, and it goes through a panel, and then we invest in that idea. If that idea shows progress, we will invest greater resources and money. And then this helps, whether it's a company, an individual, academia, take their idea to a new level, but we get to be the beneficiary of utilizing it. So at the same time, as Canada benefits, our NATO allies benefit as well. So, so in a roundabout way, we're all benefiting together. Having said this, yes, absolutely, we need to be able to share our ideas, and this is something that has worked very well. And we're actually already modifying things because we have classified things so often that sometimes the civilian sector has already solved that problem. So what I've said to our innovation folks is get out there, see what industry is doing. Sometimes a little tweak here and there with a product can be of great value to us. So, but we don't just look at it from a defense, from a cyber or weapons or defensive weapons. We're also looking at how we manage our people as well, how we have dealt with the pandemic. So it has been very successful. And we've, for example, invested $1.6 million over the 20-year lifespan of our defense policy just in the IDEAS program.
Minister Sajjan, is there anything like a specific product that you've been able to almost bring to market through this process?
There's many things that we've done. So, for example, how we recruit in greater diversity, recruiting women. But we also, for example, during this pandemic, how certain reusable PPE. We also have smaller challenges, and how, for example, with people with beards in the military, how do you put a respirator on? We're also looking at everything from in the cyber domain. So there's many different examples that can be that I can utilize, and we've have many products that are moving, but probably the most the beneficial side that I have seen is that collaboration that has taken place. Those networks that are creating, because one product over here or discussion may lead to other ideas. And what I've said is finding that right talent is probably even far more important than the one product itself. And we're working very closely with the U.S., obviously, when it comes to the Arctic, on what type of security challenges that we see in the North. And we want to be able to share a lot of that experience with our NATO allies as well.
Thank you. With that, I would like to turn to the audience. I already gave you a heads up we'd be turning to questions, and we've got some good ones coming in. But I would like to pulse you with a word cloud through your Slido app and ask you all what you see as the top obstacle to NATO modernization and interoperability, picking up on what Minister Sajjan was just talking about. And as you all think about that, I see some people picking up their apps. I will go to one of the first questions. Oh, actually, I should wait until, I should let the screen populate a little bit more. I'm rushing people's thought process. Consensus? The defense industry? As an obstacle. We'll have to have some conversations over the end lunch about that. Private sector leading, that could be, well, one of the complaints I frequently hear from the defense industry is they are brought into the process too late in the game and then are told to basically, we need you to produce a solution overnight. And of course, classification issues are part of the problem. As Minister Sajjan also mentioned, bureaucracy is the one that is coming up the most. So the system that is supposed to help us is slowing us down. Wow, a lot for defense industry. Sorry, guys. North-south infrastructure, that's something that we have also heard about. Russia was able to get all of its troops to where it intended very quickly during its recent Zapad exercises, whereas I understand that NATO had some people that took days, if not weeks, to get there because some of their equipment wouldn't fit on the right trains, or certain trains can only take military cargo overnight, et cetera, et cetera. So let me turn to a question from Matus Slovaki from Moody's. Data shows increased activity of Chinese state-owned companies buying intellectual property. How can you avoid hegemony of some vital aspects, things like 5G and quantum computing? So that's something I heard debated a lot in NSA and GCHQ circles. People don't understand. They would say that China's buying their way into your systems. Minister, would you like to take that one?
Oh, well, on 5G, we have been rather bold lately, based on some negative experiences back home in North Macedonia, but also in the region. We have signed a memorandum of understanding with the US, saying that we will be very restrictive on technology coming from countries where there is no democratic control and there are vested and hidden interests. It's a document that can be signed, but implementation lags behind because it requires a lot of procedural things. And what we have been focusing lately is, of course, the discussion about strategic investments and screening of strategic investors. We have had some experience with Chinese loans on infrastructure, not as bad as some of the other countries in the Balkans, but we are still waiting for one of the very expensive highways to be constructed. But we saw this as an element of vulnerability, not because infrastructure is only important for defense, as you said, but because it undermines the institutions. So I do believe that what we can work with is a much better cooperation within NATO on discussing our own internal regulations. I'm sometimes shocked when, a conversation between two ministers can touch a very sensitive thing on how do we do these procurements better? How do we protect ourselves in these sensitive areas better? And sometimes a 15 minutes discussion actually can be more helpful to us as ministers than long discussions and long documents that haven't led us anywhere. So in my view, on mobility, it's a shame that we cannot do better. We have been discussing this issue. There were movements, but because of national regulations and because we are used to things moving slowly on these fronts, I think that we are lagging behind. We are dealing with strategic adversary in countries where institutions, private sector, and academia work under the same umbrella all the time, and we cannot afford a relaxed relationship. And I think we should go back to the basis and discuss some of our experiences with regulation and reconsider some of them. I saw the bureaucracy looming from the screen, but we are victims of our own successes. I mean, the whole procurement policy has been developed on the premises of transparency, competition, and it has brought huge dividends. Now, there are some costs attached to it. So we should look at these issues with a fresh set of eyes. And I think that we should reconsider some of these things. A discussion with industry is great. But, defense is about huge acquisitions, huge amounts of money. If you talk to the industry, sometimes you are attacked for liaising with them or having vested interests. So how do you go around this, maintaining the confidence of our citizens while making these procurements realistic goals and making them successful? I don't think it's not an easy equation, but I think that some of the countries were more successful in dealing with them. And I think, new countries especially, but even some of the old member states should not shy away from, maybe reassessing the policies.
Thank you. If anyone in the room would like to stand up and ask a question, raise your hand so I can spot you. But in the meantime, I have a question. Minister, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a few things on the 3 points that were raised here. First of all, if you would be asking me on the biggest obstacle then it's definitely, and I had it written before it appeared on the screen, a legal regulation in public procurement. I mean, at a certain period of time, you have to acquire something really fast, and especially with the COVID situation, for example. This is the lesson that we learned a year ago. And it took us a very long time in order to follow all the regulations and realize that actually this is a legal regulation for good times. But for bad times, you need something else. And I honestly say now we had a ballot discussion with my dear colleague Radmila, and we actually had very similar positions in terms of how we can fasten the whole process, make it really fast, including things like NATO Supplies and Procurement Agency that works quite well for Slovakia, for example, or American System of Foreign Military Sales or Foreign Military Fund, or Canadian. Harjit, good thing is also your CCC system that you have for procurement on bilateral G2G basis. This is something that we should use more. And while talking about this, I also mentioned the cooperation with the private sector, which is extremely, crucially important because usually we are users. We would like to have a certain capability, but it's actually usually the private sector that comes with solutions. And I'm the one who is not afraid of meeting companies, because for us, for defense ministers, it is extremely important to talk to state sector, NGO, academia, and the private sector. If you want to be responsible for whole defense, then the defense industry is extremely important. And last point on 5G. Yes, very similar to Radmila's point, we have also signed a memorandum with the United States on being very responsible in 5G. But being honest, the pressure, economic pressure that comes from countries that might create difficulties for us in 5G area, this economic pressure, the financial pressure is extreme. And sometimes it's a discussion about values, about security, but it's also discussion on the cabinet level about labor, about money, about investments. And this discussion is not black and white, obviously. So, security on one side, but new jobs for undeveloped areas in Slovakia on the other side, right? And you need to find a proper balance.
Before I go to another app question, I would like to ask Minister Sajan, you, especially with your oversight over CSE, you must understand better than most what technical capabilities various cyber actors have, including China. Can you, a lot of Europeans, NATO members, apparently pushed back behind closed doors at the NATO summit and basically said to the White House, to President Biden, you have this jingoistic fight going on against China and you want us to cut them off, but they're one of the world's largest manufacturers. We can't do that. Can you come in as a kind of the neutral actor to explain the threat of China without people dismissing it as a fight between two kids in a schoolyard, a dangerous fight?
No, absolutely. And I think extremely important. You want to take Canada as an example on this. Our history is known. Canada is a peace-loving nation. We've been taking part in every NATO operations. And when we're trying to be a responsible partner in the world, all of a sudden, a nation like China arbitrarily detains your citizens because and that hostage diplomacy that takes place all of a sudden changes your perspective on things. So we know that China has obviously a value and a responsibility in the world. They're a growing economic power. We all know that. There's an opportunity for everyone to benefit from this. However, the international rules-based order offers predictability to nations. That predictability is absolutely essential for nations to be able to interact with one another, to be able to make sure that our trade moves. Because if that international rules-based order is undermined, all our nations have an impact. And the last thing you want is to be able to put a nation put yourself in a situation like this. Right now, we have 2 Canadians that have been detained for over 2 years. But let's not forget other nations. We're talking about 5G. It's not just a decision moving forward. Nations have to look at what decisions were made in the past to making sure that their infrastructure is prepared for the future. So I'll give you an example of this. So within CSE, we and when it came to 4G technology, we worked very closely with the telecommunication sector to be able to take a look at what type of systems were being placed across the country, and especially in core areas. And we have an extremely good idea exactly where and what is needed to move forward. So our 4G infrastructure is very solid. And we have to make some minor changes and upgrades and working with the telecommunication companies, and we're going to be strengthening that as well. So moving forward, our 5G infrastructure will be just as stronger, if not better. CSE now is not just about adding resources and technology, it has greater authorities. So for example, we have defensive cyber authorities, we have offensive cyber authorities, and that provides a lot of deterrence, and we work together with allied nations already in calling out nefarious cyber attacks. But one thing is absolutely certain here. Moving forward, how do we prevent the problem that we're talking about right now, which is we should be investing now in 6G technology? And so rather than being in a position where we're talking about with 5G technology and how do we get here, and other nations has type of equipment and coercive authorities, and what they're doing in our nations could be extremely disruptive to our nations moving into the future. We need to start investing in the 6G technology now so that we're not put in these type of situation. And that is absolutely critical here. What that also demonstrates to us is that we will not allow nations to be able to take hold and use leverage over smaller nations as well. So moving forward, we need to be able to work together. U.S. What's happened in the U.S. should be an example for the rest of the world on what we need to prevent, and take those concerns very seriously.
Oh, two questions. Is Canada already working on 6G, and how fast would my phone go if that existed? And when you say what happened in the U.S. doesn't happen again, which aspect of what happened in the U.S.?
I would say when it comes to 5G technology, they too have making a decision to say that we don't want a certain company doesn't make you safe. You have to take a look at what infrastructure decision has already been made. And so, for example, certain systems need to be potentially ripped out to making sure that systems are safe. But also, at the same time, this is not just about one nation or one company. This is about making sure that any time you put any type of technology into core systems, I'm talking about whether it's cyber here, that it's well protected. You can say that, well, we'll pick company X because company Y is part of a different nation. Well, company X may not have the expertise to be as cyber safe and could be easily hacked. So we have to be very mindful of the decisions that we make. So working together collaboratively, and goes back to our previous discussion that we had on sharing on innovation with trusted partners is very important. One thing I can assure you, in addition to working as part of NATO, Canada works bilaterally with many European nations on security issues and developing these things. So when it comes to research on 6G technology, I don't even know what 6G technology will be. But let's put it this way. We didn't know what artificial intelligence or machine learning was, but we invested in Canada a long time ago in this that has developed the algorithms that led to a lot of the great innovation. But then, so the question that we really have to ask ourselves, where is technology going? Where do we need to go so that it's a betterment for all our citizens, better for trade, but at the same time, prevent and as my colleague had stated earlier, we need to make sure that we as nations come together and have the right regulations in place so that nations don't use it as disruptive technologies to use leverage over the other nations.
So you heard it here first, members of industry who are attending GlobeSec. One of the things NATO is going to want in the future is 6G. Get on it. So I'd like to go to a very provocative question that has come in on the app from someone who identifies themselves only as S. What steps can NATO take if Russia decides to annex Belarus? And my corollary to that is, what do you think of the Biden-Putin summit outcome? Was this an unnecessary reward to Putin, or will it serve to check malign activity? So, Minister Nadia.
Okay. Difficult to say. If Russia decides to annex Belarus, I don't think NATO should, object in a similar way that it objected when Russia annexed Crimea, because the situation of Ukraine and Belarus is vis-a-vis NATO is completely different. On one hand, it is if it is illegal annexation, obviously United Nations and other international organizations, including EU or NATO, should communicate that this is illegal annexation. But I don't expect and I don't see any will of Belarus to come closer to NATO or European Union countries. On contrary, it comes very close to Russia, especially in a recent months. And with a situation like hijacking the plane, Belarus is even its very non-standard position of somebody in between NATO or European Union and Russia. It comes closer to authoritarian countries, and I don't see any light in the end of tunnel. Discussion between Biden and Putin was, I think, as expected. No surprises. Maybe I was a little bit surprised. This is my personal opinion, that President Biden was, after this meeting, during the press conference, a little more tough than I expected him to be, which is good, which was a good signal for me, especially after, for me, surprising decision of Biden's administration to give a green light on Nord Stream 2. This was, for me, it was rather surprising, even though some people said it was, that we should expect that because the pressure from Germany was very high, and President Biden didn't want to question their relationship with Germany on this issue. But nevertheless, for countries like Ukraine and countries like Slovakia, this Nord Stream program is or project is something.
Though if the Green Party wins in Germany, they say they're going to pull out of it, even though they have to pay canceled contract costs. So
before the election, right? Let's see what they do afterwards. Honestly saying, this meeting was important for the strategic stability. It was important for the signals towards Russia. It was important, and more meetings these two gentlemen have better. On the other hand, I think the only thing that Putin is listening to is a strong word and strong action. Angela Merkel knows that. She was able to show the way how to deal with President Putin previously, and I believe that President Biden, with getting some experience in his new occupation, he will follow this, I would say, more strict way of communication.
Thank you.
And action.
Minister Sajin, if faced with the issue with Belarus, what would you be urging?
Well, first of all, what's happening in Belarus is we've been very clear with our allies on this. It's quite unacceptable. But at the end of the day, it comes down to what is the will of the people of Belarus. It's what they want to decide, where they want to go. If they choose to be closer to Russia, it is their right to do so. If they don't, and there is greater aggression, it is up to us as NATO allies to be able to express that, as we have been.
Thank you. And Minister Sakarinska.
From all the black swan scenarios, I don't think that this is the ones we should focus, because why annex a country where you have such an overwhelming influence? It's always much smarter to keep that extra voice in the different rooms. But it could be a communication opportunity for NATO. If this is how if this is how Russia would treat their allies, what would you expect in the future from an alliance of that kind? Nevertheless, I think that we should look at the broader picture. When analyzing Russian moves, I think that you will see a lot of rationality. If there is one sentence that I have still remembered from my history lessons too many years ago, it's an old statement by, I think, Ulysses Grant, but don't quote me if I have made the mistake. War is progressive, which means that just as you think that you have learned your lessons from the previous war, from the previous conflict, you believe that you can replicate them. That's utterly wrong, because any opponent that is weaker in your domain will quickly shift to the other domain. And this is what Russia is doing. You know, when you see the overwhelming military power of NATO in many domains, then they start doing disinformation and fake news and cyber attacks, and it's cheaper, it's quicker, and it causes more damage than actually the typical military move. And we have in the Balkans, I have seen at the first poll we did, I saw a lot of Balkan references. They were small, but if you take all of them together, actually they were meaningful. I think that we have seen these kinds of moves throughout the Balkans very visibly. And maybe when mentioning what has happened to the US years ago, some of the trailers for this were visible in the Balkans. And maybe these small countries can sometimes be a good learning ground for the old established democracy. What might happen if something goes wrong? What we have seen throughout the Balkans is a Russian scenario in which they don't offer anything. They just play on the weaknesses of the West. When we first expressed our desire to move forward with NATO after being elected, for the first time in our history, there was a strong message against it coming from Moscow. We were surprised. We never actually had any communication with Moscow, public or diplomatic, on this. They have really been very firm on saying that they will oppose our NATO membership in various ways. And what we have seen is that they have tried to undermine our agreement with Greece everywhere they could. Greece had to expel several diplomats because of their influence within the Greek society. We have seen less intervention within the Macedonian society, but still it was visible. When we finally became a NATO member, and this was a war that they have lost, they didn't waste time. They switched immediately to the other goal, EU, undermining EU accession and sending this very strong message throughout the Balkans. And this is that the West cannot be trusted. You know, NATO, EU, they're very different, but you know, when you attack them to the roots. And this is what they have been successful. I see many echoes in Belgrade, Pristina, Sarajevo, even Podgorica from time to time. Look at North Macedonia. They have done incredible reforms. They have come to an agreement with Greece after 3 decades of disputes. They have entered NATO, but look at the EU. They're not delivering on what was promised. So why would Belgrade and Pristina be so focused on getting an agreement while there is no reliability. And this has been really a message that was sent not only from Moscow directly, but especially through social media and the networks that have been leaning towards Moscow. And unlike the geopolitical game, the visible geopolitical game that they have played, which was unsuccessful, this is actually where they're winning. So allowing vacuum is opening the gates to a new type of warfare, which is easier than the traditional one for which we have spent a lot of money and a lot of years of preparation.
Thank you. Well, it sounds like the best way to deter Moscow is for NATO to keep its word and do it as quickly as possible.
Well, this was the message that echoed throughout the Balkans. NATO has kept its word when it comes to accession. I'm really satisfied that NATO has kept its word on reiterating the open door policy, even at this summit. I think that's very important. I do believe that on the EU front, there will be, as the President of the Commission said, more of a geopolitical approach. And when it comes to the Balkans, it's enlargement. And that has been a recipe that has worked. It has changed the outlook for the continent. And I think that the time has come to move forward.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to thank the ministers for all of your input and invite you to join the audience, and thank everyone for listening. I just wanted to add that one of the best ways for us to fight disinformation is to keep having amazing forums like this, where people like me can ask tough questions of the people in charge. And with that, I'd like to turn over to Maitri and Terry.
Thank you very much for that. And it was such an insightful conversation. It's been an insightful conversation for 3 days. But all good things have to come to an end, as does GlobeSec 2021.
Sadly.
Sadly, indeed. But I know we've had an opportunity to have conversations. We've been able to interact in person and as well as virtually. So thank you to everyone who came in person and to those who couldn't join us here. Thank you for joining us virtually. I think one of the big takeaways for us, as it is every year, is the highlighting point that Central Europe is very, very key as we redevelop these cross-Atlantic and ties as we go forward.
Exactly. There's been a big emphasis on reinvigorating the transatlantic relationship. That has partly to do, of course, with Joe Biden making his first visit to Europe as the U.S. vice president. But there's also a recognition of at this conference at least, of the importance of Central Europe as a partner in that relationship. And on that subject, I just want to point out something that one speaker said, which I thought was very relevant for our discussions that we've had here over the past few days. And he said on that subject that it's not about the U.S. doing something in Central Europe, but rather with Central Europe and with Europe as a whole.
And I think that's highlighted across the board when you see the range of voices that we've heard from. We've heard today, for example, from the ministers of defense from Canada, Slovakia, North Macedonia, even the deputy defense minister of Japan. We've had corporate voices here as well. We've had Ericsson represented. We've had the CEO of ESET as well. Lots more voices and lots more sectors.
International institutions very well represented here, of course, from the European Union. We had the Vice President of the European Union, a couple of Vice Presidents over the past couple of days. We also had the Deputy Secretary General of NATO with us today, offering his wisdom and insights. We had seminal thinkers, too. Everyone here, of course, is a thinker in one way or another, but we had some people who really shaped our understanding of democracy, of liberal democracy, over the past couple of years. Just want to highlight Ivan Krastev, who of course is the light that faded, I think is the title of his book, which was so impactful. Neelam Dio and Tori Talsik, just among others.
And I think it was really interesting to have a conversation with Leonard Volkov right after that Biden-Putin summit and get his take on what he's seeing in DC, where he was right now. So amazing voices, amazing thoughts. I hope you've all gained quite a lot from these 3 days. So I wanted to talk about where we started off from on Tuesday. We put up a Slido and asked you for the 3 or 4 key words that you were hoping to get out of the 3 days. And the highlight points were climate, security, democracy, post-pandemic challenges. So again, look at the fact that you have the Slido right now. I would love to ask you, actually Terry asked them the question. It was your
Okay,
idea.
again, we've got these words in the word cloud, and we asked you that at the beginning of the conference, what you were thinking about. We're going to come full circle now and ask you, as we're closing, what your main takeaways are from this conference. If you could use your app, if you downloaded the app. Also, those at home, you can contribute to this as well. Pick up on 1, 2, maybe 3 words and try to formulate an idea, your main takeaways from this conference. And we're beginning to get well, we've got challenges there at the center, networking, hope. Okay, from that, I think we can begin to surmise what you're coming away with from this conference.
And I think unity, hope, challenges, oh my, networking, I love that. I mean, that is the key part of doing a hybrid conference and being able to meet in person. I think that is critical. And as that builds, I would like to acknowledge and thank our organizers at GlobeSec for making this possible, making us feel safe as they did even last year in a smaller number. So thank you very much for that. Let's see. 6G has popped up.
6G, indeed. We're moving on from 5G.
We're moving along quite quickly, indeed.
Resilience still there. Hope still being strong. We've got tech disruption. What else we got moving there? Climate security, something that was beginning, that we heard a lot at the very beginning. That has remained a theme. European integration, EU enlargement, sustainable democracy. Sustainable democracy, not just democracy.
Well,
anyway.
As that word cloud builds, and I know we will keep it on as we wrap up this show, the one thing I'm going to say is I'm glad to see cooperation, hope, and resilience up there, loud and clear, along with the networking. I think at this point we should wrap up because everyone has places to go, people to see.
It's been a great pleasure for me to be with you as MC for both Maitri and myself. It's been really, really good. I've learned a lot, as I always do at GlobeSec, and it's been a great privilege for me to be with you for these discussions and deliberations. And without further ado, I think we should give the floor to someone whom you all know at this point, who's without whom GlobeSec simply wouldn't exist. We're talking about GlobeSec's founder and president, Robert Faes. Thank you.
Thank you, Maitri and Terry. And you wrapped it up extremely well, so you made my job very easy. Because all my job now is to thank you. All of you who came here to Bratislava with all the travel restrictions, some of you, when you will travel home, you will still have to go to quarantine, and you still came. And it's so refreshing to see faces and humans, and not only virtually through Zoom. Everybody was just sick and tired of this 1 year of Zoom calls from the morning to the evening. And it's also refreshing to change, the home office pajamas to suits, actually. We arranged very good weather for you as well here in Bratislava. So I really hope you all enjoyed the discussion. And it's not a coincidence that the main word that came up was networking, because that's what is it about. You cannot build networks and friendships through Zoom. You can keep them. It's a good as a crisis situation. But the most important thing is that you're meeting in the corridors, you're exchanging views, and you're building friendships, you're building business. This is one of the most important things of the conference. And when Jaro said that it was one of his toughest jobs to work for GlobeSec, I have to say that he's a fighter. You can actually see it on him, also on the on the football field. But it was also a pleasure to work with you when you were at GlobeSec, but also to continue working with you as a Minister of Defense. And thank you for your support. And thanks for the support of also the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ivan Korchok, and all the institutional partners like the International Visegrad Fund, NATO PDD, Wilfried Martens Center, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and many others, the corporate partners, media partners. Actually, we had very strong media partners. Euronews was putting some of the discussion live. We have AFP, AP, and many others coming from 30 countries. And actually, also connecting the physical world and the virtual world made it the biggest conference, because 98 countries were present virtually or physically here, which is excellent. I think it's a record in the last several years. But also we needed to make sure that, and Ivan, thank you for your great support. You are coming in the right moment. Yeah, thank you. Actually, when I look at these two members of the government, I'm so proud. But also making sure that everything goes smoothly, that we keep the healthiness and the security of health. Actually, based on our data, 70% of you who came are already vaccinated, which is tremendous. Absolutely great. We made 1,600 PCR tests, and thanks to our partners like Multiplex DX, Slovak Academy of Science, and other partners, without whom this would be absolutely impossible. But we've, in GlobSec, went through very difficult time in the last year. We had to scale down our core team. We lost some finances, so it was real struggling. But we also used this opportunity to go out stronger from the crisis. We have made a lot of measures internally. We created a new board of directors who are here with us, a new chairman of the board, Vili Molterel, but also Vasil Hudak, Peter Pudil, Anita Orban, Michal Krupinski, Ivan Krastyo, and Gordon Bajnai, who are helping us to steer the GlobSec in the right way. And also, I would like to thank my old friend, Ambassador Kaczer, who always sometimes comes to GlobSec and then he leaves for some government position or ambassadorial, but I'm sure that he will come back again. Most of all, I would like to thank to the great team of GlobSec, because without their belief, it would be absolutely impossible. I have to say that creating and organizing GlobSec in an environment where you don't know how the pandemic will look like, when you cannot plan what will be a month ahead, it's a tremendous challenge physically, but also psychologically, because you don't know. You have so many moving things and moving targets. And I have to say that we all took a risk that we will organize it. We fixed the conference for June, and I think we did the right thing. But without their belief in what we are doing, it would be impossible. So I would like to thank to the core team, Milan, who is here with us, Kevin, Natalia, Daniel, Nadia, Alex, Emma, Adam, Lucia Colníková, Lucia Rybníkárová, Marek, the production team and the GEM agency, the communication team of Lucia and her team, Alena and the GlobSec Policy Institute team, John and the strategic partnerships team. I mean, it's a month of work. So thank you very much, and I think you deserve great applause. So Bratislava 2021 Forum is coming to the end, but it does not really stop us here, because we are already kicking off the preparations for next year, and we hope that we will not need to wear these masks. It's so difficult to breathe in that. And I hope that we will be able to fight COVID together, and that we will not face more mutations, and that the vaccination globally will speeden up. And for that, we need international cooperation. For that, we need international solutions. And places like this, GlobSec, are fostering it and putting also Bratislava and Slovakia on the map. So thank you once again for all those who came here, and I wish you a good trip home. We still have a lunch here, so just take some maybe lunch and wine, and I wish you all the best today and for the rest of the week. Thank you once again, and see you in the future.